Their eyes, they can look into yours, and they can see the effect that their words have on you. And for some people, it's very satisfying to see the pain that they can inflict with their words. So now I went through life with my head down. I looked neither to the right nor to the left. But I had a problem. I had no place to live. Oh, but that wasn't really a problem, was it? It was just a decision I had to make. My friends, I'd been married 5 times. I knew the power I had over men. I didn't seem to have the power to make them love me, but for some reason I had the power to make them want to have me around, at least for a little while. And when one grew tired of me, it seemed there would be another. There was an endless supply of such men. After all, the people were right. There was something wrong with me. I couldn't keep a husband. And I was nothing but a whore. And I was the only one that was fooled. And it was time to stop fooling myself. It was time for me to live the life that I was meant to live. And that very day, I began to live the life of a harlot. Oh, you don't have to feel anything when you live that life. In fact, the less you feel, the better off you are. That's how I was living that day when I walked to the well. I'll never forget that day. I think it was the hottest day I'd ever experienced. And I hated that walk to the well because, you see, when you walk 2 miles in the hot and the dust, it's not only miserable, but you see, your mind is not kept busy. And when your mind is not kept busy, you have time to let your mind wander, and you wonder, what if? And every day when I would walk to that well, I would wonder, what if? What if one of my husbands had cared for me? What if I'd had that child I wanted so much? What if, I would say to myself, what's wrong with you? You hate your life, but it's the one you've chosen. It's the way you'll live until the day that you die, and you might as well accept it. And that's what I was thinking that day as I got close enough to see the well. And when I looked up at the well, my heart sank. There was a man sitting beside the well. What could I do? Oh, I could go back to the house where I was living, but I had no water. And if I went back now, I would have to return to the well later. And if I came back in the cool of the evening, some of the women of the village would be there. Oh, I knew what would happen when they were there. I thought, this is just one man. I've handled enough men in my life. I thought, I'll walk up and get my water, and if he says anything to me, I'll put him in his place and go my way. I walked on a little closer, and I became very curious about this man because, you see, I could tell by the way he was dressed, he was not Samaritan. This was a Hebrew. It was not only a Hebrew, but a devout Hebrew. He had a talit, a prayer shawl around his neck. He was probably a rabbi. And I wondered, what was a Hebrew rabbi doing sitting in Samaria? Oh, I wouldn't find out. I knew he wouldn't speak to me. You see, a Hebrew won't even speak to his own wife in public. I knew he wouldn't speak to a Samaritan woman. But that was fine. I would walk up and get my water and go my way undisturbed. I walked up and I began to draw the water, and I glanced down at him, and I thought to myself, that man looks as tired as I feel. Suddenly he looked up at me and he said, give me a cool drink of water. I stepped back from him. Oh, I would give him a drink. I worked too hard for a simple drink myself to ever deny anyone a drink of water. But I couldn't help but ask him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, for a drink of water? He said, if you knew the gift of God, if you knew who it was that asked you, you would ask him and he would give you living water. I thought, well, now that's a strange thing for him to say to me. I said, sir, are you greater than our ancestor Jacob? He dug this well. It's 90 feet deep. You must have a vessel to draw the water. You've asked me to draw the water, and now you're going to give me living water? How will you give me living water? He said, I tell you the truth. If you drink the water in this well, you'll get thirsty again. But if you drink the water I give you, you'll never be thirsty again. That was even stranger than the first thing he said to me. But I thought, what if he has some sort of magical water and I can drink it once and never be thirsty again? Oh, I wanted that water. I said, give me this living water you're talking about. He stood up beside me and he said, go and call your husband and I'll give you living water. Now, my friends, let me tell you something about telling lies. I wasn't very old when I realized it was far easier to tell people what they wanted to hear than to worry about whether it was true or not. And I had told so many lies in my life. Most of the time, I didn't know the truth from a lie. But somehow I couldn't lie to this man. I set my water pot down and I turned away from him and I looked down and I said, well, you see, I'm not married. I don't have a husband. He said, oh, you've spoken truthfully. For you've been married 5 times, but the man you're with now is not your husband. Now, that man had never been in our village. There was no way he could have known that about me. The very last thing I wanted to do was to look into his eyes. You see, as I said, I had seen enough judgment and condemnation to last me a lifetime. And if this man knew about my life, I knew what I would see in his eyes. But I couldn't seem to help myself. I found myself turning toward him. And very slowly I lifted my eyes until I was looking into his eyes. Oh my. I can see them as if it were yesterday. There are no words in your language or mine to describe his eyes. There was no judgment or condemnation in them. They were dark, they were almost black, and they were gentle, and they were full of love. Why, I felt as if there were love flowing out from him and wrapping itself around me. I have no idea how long I stood there staring into his eyes that day. You see, no one had ever looked at me like that before. While I was looking into his eyes, he was looking into mine, and it was as if he were looking into my very soul. I found myself flooded with memories. It seemed like I remembered every time I'd ever been judged or condemned. It was like I was feeling it all over again. But then suddenly those feelings were gone. And there was something different, something very strange, something I'd never felt before. There was something inside of me, and I found myself standing there looking at him, and I started to smile, and then I started to laugh. I didn't even know what I was laughing at, but I laughed right out loud, and I thought to myself, this is what it feels like to be happy. It was bubbling up inside of me. I couldn't control it, but then I thought, we need to stop talking about my life. I thought if we talk about my life anymore and his eyes change, I'll not be able to handle it. I thought, I'll change the subject. I said, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. You can answer a question for me. Our people, the Samaritans, say there's only one place to worship God, here in our temple on Mount Gerizim, and your people say it is in the temple in Jerusalem. Where is the proper place to worship God? Oh, he said, you Samaritans worship what you do not know. We Hebrews worship what we do know, for salvation will come from the Hebrews. He said, the time is coming. The time now is that those who worship my Father will worship him in spirit and in truth. He explained to me that his Father God, that's what he called him, my Father God. He said he's a spirit. He's not contained in a temple on a mountain or a temple in a city. He is everywhere around you. And when you worship God, it's not important where you are. What's important is what's in your heart. And if you love God and you want to worship him right here by this well. Worship him in your home, in the middle of the road, it doesn't matter. I said, well, sir, it is written that Messiah will come and explain everything to us. He looked right into my eyes and he said, I who speak to you am he. And my friends, you can imagine, it took me a minute to comprehend what he had just said to me. But as soon as I realized it, I thought, well, I have questions for you. And I started to ask him a question, but just as I started, I heard noises behind me. And when I turned around and I looked back toward the village, there were 12 men coming toward me. Well, I could see by the way they were dressed, they too were Hebrews. These would be his Talmudim, his disciples. They had been in the village to get food. They were carrying that food, and I stepped back. Well, I was afraid of what they would say to me. A Samaritan woman speaking to a rabbi in public. They walked by. They looked at me. Oh, they didn't say anything, but they looked at me. And they went right to him with the food, and as I turned to leave, I heard them talk about the food. He said, I have food that you know nothing about. Doing the will of my Father, that's my food. And when he talked about food like that, suddenly it was so clear to me, the water he'd talked about had nothing to do with my physical thirst. The water he talked about was this joy, this laughter that was bubbling up inside of me. He had said it would bubble up inside me like a spring of living water. And that's what it felt like. And I realized that if I didn't do something quickly, he would leave.